Okay, you're live. I think we're live, right, Celeste?
Yes, you're live now.
All right, just make sure. Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to What's the Tea with South Suburban Family Shelter. My name is Angie. I am from the Community Education Department. And of course, today we have our special, reoccurring, very important person here, Miss Jennifer, who is our Executive Director. She is with us today. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Angie.
How are you today?
I am okay. I'm hanging in there. We're having some transitioning to in-person school issues today, but we'll get through it.
It's okay. It's working from home. Maybe it's just today. I woke up, it was snowing. So I was so confused. I was like, where am I? So maybe it's just the weather. It's.
Right.
Yeah. So today, we just want to thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for just your continued support. I believe this is our 49th episode. So we just want to thank you all so much. So today I'm really excited. As you're grabbing your tea, I'm gonna just be talking to you all about today's topic. So I say this whenever I come on here. So in the month of April. So April is known for a lot of different things. It has a lot of great forces that's going on in this month. But also this month is National Child Abuse Awareness Month. Okay, so we will also be covering that topic today. So 1 out of every 7 children in the US has experienced either sexual assault or physical abuse. And this is from the nationaltoday.com website. And just to give a little background about it, so former President Jimmy Carter actually coined April as Child Abuse Awareness Month in 1979. So that's just like a little what's the tea. So I looked that up as well. So it is Child Abuse Awareness Month. So I really think this is important, especially with us being in the field of prevention and working with our young ones, our adolescents and teenagers as well. So Jenny, how are you today? We're going to get into this because you have so much expertise. Jenny is just very she has a lot of knowledge and expertise in this field. So of course, what great person to have on here today. So Jenny, if you could start off just kind of by telling us just a little bit about your experience in this field, because I know that even when you were in college, you had a lot of involvement within, child prevention. So if you could please give us some background with that.
Yeah, so April, along with it being Child Abuse Prevention Month, is also Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So in my mind, those two converge around child sexual abuse prevention work. So when I majored in this kind of stuff in college and really focused on like campus assault prevention at that point. But my first job I went to college out here in Chicago. My first job took me back to Ohio, where I'm from. And I ended up getting a job at this little domestic violence agency in Knox County, Ohio, which is like about 50,000 people at the time for the entire county, just sort of like on the edge of Appalachia, pretty rural area. And that it was just a house, like a 2-bedroom house. And my office was, I'm pretty sure, a closet. Like, I'm pretty sure the walk-in closet where that door is that you see behind me was the same size, if not maybe bigger than the office.
That's where all the magic happened.
And so we did everything. We were the DV agency, we were the sexual assault agency, we were the child abuse prevention agency, like we did it all. And we did a program there called the Child Assault Prevention Program. It was CAP, CAPP. And I'm not even sure if that's still around. But it was a program that was geared towards like younger kids, preschool through early elementary school. So I did a lot of things with preschool and kindergarten age children specifically, and it's scripted, and there were like these puppets that we used, and there are these hand motions that we went through, and all of this kind of stuff was very, very specific. So that's when I started doing really specific child abuse prevention work and learning a lot about child sexual abuse, child assault. We hosted a spank out day and got death threats at the agency that we were at for daring to tell people that maybe they should consider disciplining their children in other kinds of ways rather than using physical discipline. So it was a really interesting place to be.
Yeah.
And so that kind of has always been part of it, because I feel like I was kind of brought into it that way and never felt like I could separate it. And then, later on down the line, many moons ago, I started doing work with a couple of children's advocacy centers. And children's advocacy centers exist specifically around like child sexual assault, severe child abuse. They are starting to do a lot more around like trafficking, human trafficking of children and things like that. And really, when reports have been made to either DCFS or the police department, trying to coordinate that interview process and services with the children around the idea that the children don't end up having to talk to some. I mean, they would find that kids were talking to, like, they were having to tell their story, several
Several
times.
times.
And in an effort to stop that from happening and having the children to have to retell that as few times as possible is kind of where this model came from.
So I want to be like Jenny when I grow up. Just to put it out there. No, so this is amazing. You did a lot of things, and I can only imagine just how mentally and emotionally that may have weighed on you at the time of working in that field. And I'm just thinking, even just campus assault itself, where probably was like, whoa, what's happening here? Like, what is going on? Because that's a whole nother spectrum,
It is a whole other, yeah, they all have their own thing. Yeah, a lot of my life is essentially like, if you look really closely, I have lines here, because a lot of my life is like, what is going on?
What is happening? Just the face, just sit there like, what?
That's a lot of my life. No, but that's absolutely true. So I always tell people when we talk about how have you been doing this for so long, it was in that first job when I was in Ohio. I remember very clearly that I didn't want, my partner and I weren't married yet at the time, but we lived together, and I was like, I don't know, kissing me, don't try to hug me. Like, I didn't want, like,
It was just a lot. It's just like, I don't know.
I couldn't handle any of that, like, physical
Yeah.
expression of love, because I'm listening to horrible things all day.
Yeah, but honestly, just think about it. We talk about self-care all the time. So imagine you have bringing that home with you, especially like this is the early stages of you just building your purpose. So it's just like, whoa, okay, one step at a time.
Yeah, learning those boundaries is a huge piece of doing that kind of work. Like, what can I do and what can I not do? So I don't watch like Law and Order, or police dramas, or
Okay.
any of those kinds of shows where it might be often that there's a storyline, and even when it shows up, we're always like, oh man, like,
No,
why does it have to be here? I don't want this
Right.
in my entertainment. I'm trying to intentionally carve out space where this isn't in front of me all the time.
No, that's completely understandable. And like you said, you have to know your boundaries. You have to know it. So I know that you're working in this field. You have a lot of experience with just prevention in general, outreach and prevention. So what is exactly effective prevention?
Yeah, prevention is my favorite. So
I'm just like, tell me more.
yeah, I consider myself to be a preventionist, and that's definitely where I came into the work. And my understanding of it has changed over time, but essentially, the formula of prevention is extremely simple, but incredibly complex to actually do. So the idea is, we've got risk factors here, and we've got protective factors here, and risk factors are essentially things that make a person at higher risk for either experiencing or experiencing one way or another, either by doing it or having it done to them, some type of not great thing. And then protective factors are factors that exist that decrease the possibility that that not great thing is going to happen to that person or that they're going to do it. And those exist across a continuum. So there's individual risk factors that are within, maybe me, myself. There's risk factors that can exist, within your family and your family structure, and then they can exist within your school or community structure. So they kind of cut across both risk and protective factors. So prevention is essentially decreasing those risk factors. So creating conditions in which there are as few of those as possible, and then increasing the protective factors. So again, creating the conditions in which there are as many protective factors around someone as possible. And that is the formula for prevention that we just
I
can't
like that
seem to figure
formula.
out.
Like, look, my team knows this is one of my favorite topics. So I'm like, oh, the formula. I have the credit. No, just kidding. I have the Krabby Patty formula. No, but that's really interesting. I love speaking about risk factors and protective factors because when things happen in life, you don't realize, oh, that's a risk factor, until you start getting in these fields and terms and languages being applied. So yes. Wow. Okay. That's interesting. So can we explain what exactly child abuse prevention is? As we're breaking down each thing. So what is
Yeah.
child abuse prevention?
So in child abuse prevention, so we really want to create the conditions in which children are safe. So in knowing that, and if people follow us on Facebook and follow our social media, our team's been doing a great job of laying out what child abuse is, this whole month, if you've been keeping up with our posts. So child abuse and really any kind of abuse, it can be emotional, physical, sexual. And then with children, we also talk about neglect. Which is children not being cared for in the way that young children need to be cared for. So when you're looking at prevention, you want to create the conditions in which none of those things are occurring. So if you're looking at preventing neglect, then you need to have an understanding about why the neglect is happening. So I'm going to take COVID right now, and I'm going to say that I can very easily see how some young children may be neglected because they have a single parent who has to go to work and does not have the kind of job that allows them any kind of flexibility around caring for their children. And they're choosing to go to work during the day and leaving their children home alone. And so maybe there's neglect that's going on there. So if we're looking at what's happening there, the way that we could create a condition that would prevent that neglect is for that adult to have whatever it is that they needed for supervision of that child to happen. And I don't know if that means money for childcare or other ways of getting childcare different from what they used to get. Understanding from an employer to change the ways in which they can do their work, or understanding from the system, right, that allows that person to maybe be with their young children but not lose their income. So that's what we mean by prevention and creating the conditions that support protective factors, which is extremely important because sometimes they happen organically, but sometimes we need to collectively come together and ensure that those protective factors can be there.
Absolutely. And I really like too that you related or gave a kind of a real life example because I was definitely going to ask, how does that child abuse dynamics work in the aspect of COVID-19? How does that look? Is because I'm sure, of course, we know now that a lot of things may not be reported. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not happening. So I can
Yeah.
only imagine, what's happening right now with neglect or abuse when it comes to, children and adolescents at this time right now because of the heightened stress of other things that's happening, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's really scary. I recall earlier in the pandemic, DCFS was coming out and saying their reports had dropped dramatically. And they didn't think it was because abuse dropped dramatically. They thought that it was really one of the largest groups of mandated reporters are teachers and school personnel. And when they're not seeing children anymore, they can't intervene on behalf of the children. And a lot of it doesn't get reported in any kind of way. It's just like domestic violence abuse that we deal with and sexual assault. There's a whole lot of it that doesn't get reported. There's a lot of child abuse that people don't recognize as abuse
Right,
because
right.
um, in our country in particular, a lot of adults have a sense of how they own their children, and ownership means they can do whatever they want to with
Or a lot of
their.
times, we hear parents that say, well, it happened to me and I was fine. Or, this occurred and I turned out fine, or where people think because it happened to me, it must be normal so that I could continue on that behavior, basically,
Mhm.
or
And
the
it's
discipline.
extremely prevalent.
Yeah, yeah,
Levels of physical punishment of children are extremely prevalent and are highly accepted. Even in regards to the Department of Children and Family Services, they don't accept referrals for corporal punishment. And that there can be such a wide understanding of what corporal punishment means. One person's understanding of what spanking is can look extremely different to another person, where some people would be like, that's not spanking, that's abuse. Well, who's to say what it is?
right, right. That's really important, that you did say that. So we're on this topic of reporting, and that was really important. I didn't think about that the reporting would go down, and it's like, wait, what? It went down. I don't understand, but they haven't been in school, so
Somebody has to see it.
somebody, especially if we're forced to stay at home or people don't want to go to the grocery store or go out anywhere, how is it being reported?
Yeah, I mean, that was to me the hardest thing to swallow, is knowing this is a reality that I know, like, deep in my very soul, for children that are chronically abused within their families and within their homes. When we talk about perfective factors, that school literally for way too many children is the only time in their life, the only time that they are safe is when they are in that school building, because some children's homes are chronically toxic and abusive, and they don't have any control over
or
that.
even learning or even learning now, that may be the only time that that child eats or is able to
Yes.
get a meal. So imagine not being able to go to the place that keeps you safe, that provides these resources that you need.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
so there were, um, and I'm not going to get into whether choices about kids going to school or not during COVID was
right,
right or wrong. I'm
right.
not going to get into that, but I am going to point out, the impact, um, that
Everything has
I
pros and
that
cons.
yes, that I know that this has had, um, on these children, because so many of the protective factors that were present in their lives have been completely gone, for the last year. And it's very, we just, I couldn't possibly overstate that, how that is going to affect them moving forward and their ability to integrate, because here they had a whole day, 5 days a week, where they were able to be safe, and all of that has been, for some of them, has been taken away. And it really is a very large number of children. It's one of the things that happens when you start doing work with kids who've been abused in one way or another is that your worldview, changes completely. I mentioned this, a little bit in the newsletter that we just wrote about, but any assumptions that you might have ever had about how adults and parents are going to keep their kids safe it's just wiped out. And I don't tend to share a lot of details of the stories that I've heard from kids. And maybe I should, maybe we should do more of that, because I am pretty convinced that if people really knew what some kids have to live with on a daily basis, I can't see that you can't be outraged. I mean, and I could be wrong. I mean, we know it's been very clearly laid out what's happening to, migrant children that are coming over from the border and how they're being treated. I feel like that's been pretty clearly laid out there, and I'm not seeing as much outrage about it as I would expect. But even aside from that, I mean, there are absolutely horrendous things that are happening to children in their houses every moment of every day.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's so important that you said that you will be surprised what they disclose to you. And being in the schools, it's like, oh, and Miss Angie, can I talk to you for a minute? And Miss Angie, can we go in the hallway? And Miss Angie, can I talk? And they want to talk. They want to tell you things. And some things, it's like, I'm just going back to my boss, like, okay,
Yeah,
we need to talk. I need to talk because it just could
yeah,
be a lot. And imagine if, I'm giving presentations for maybe 30 to 40 minutes, and then those extra 10 minutes is just child after child after child coming to, let me talk because it seems as if you care. Let me tell you. So as we're talking about this whole aspect of reporting, can we discuss how systems are set up to help? What are some ways that the systems are set up to help these, children?
so I feel like that's a loaded question, Angie.
I know, I know. It's like, well,
And, people's experiences with systems vary so much, that we might have a system that's intended to set up to help, but does it? What happens when people actually are engaging with that system? What does it really look like? So I could go into the Department of Children and Family Services and what the idea is around that system to be set up, but I'm not going to do that, because the reality is that the racism plays in way too heavily with how that system is utilized, and families of color and poor families are extremely disproportionately referred into DCFS, which results in some families being fractured and taken apart from each other. And what has to go into rebuilding those families is just unbelievable. So I think I would rather really focus our time in thinking about, maybe we can unpack this idea of what could the conditions be, what are the conditions that would support ideas of prevention, so that someone doesn't ever get to a place where they feel like they have to call in a system. Because unfortunately, our organization primarily serves families of color, and because we serve families that are experiencing violence, we end up seeing families, not that all families who experience violence don't have a lot of money, but families that tend to use agencies like ours tend to be families that don't have a lot of money, because our services are free,
Right.
and they're able to access our services and not have to deal with a lot of out of pocket expenses in order to be able to do that. And we know from that experience that the families that come to us don't have great experiences engaging with systems. Sometimes
Uh,
they do, and sometimes it's okay, but there's a
right.
large amount that don't. We also provide services to people who are undocumented, and so systems,
Mhm.
that's not a
That
place
just don't, yeah.
that they're going to go.
Wow. That's really okay. Well, so we brought up a really important factor of school being The home base, right? The safety for a lot of children. So, can we explain what a mandated reporter is and who exactly is that?
Yeah, so mandated reporters are folks that come into children frequently. That is part of their job. So their job is to be around children often and to have some sort of like authority or responsibility for children. So teachers are mandated reporters, social workers are mandated report. We are mandated reporters
Right.
at our organization. Everyone in the school pretty much is a mandated reporter because they can come in contact with the kids in all sorts of different kinds of ways. Doctors are mandated reporters. So there's a lot of people out there that are mandated reporters, except like, but my neighbor's not a mandated reporter, like just because you're the
Right.
neighbor to a
Right.
child, that doesn't fall into like this
Right.
required
Right.
mandated reporter category. People working at the grocery store aren't mandated reporters. They see
Okay.
children all the time,
Yeah.
but they're not. So you have to have some sort of like responsibility
Right.
around kids.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense because, just speaking, maybe some people that are in the positions, they didn't know, like, oh, wow, I really play a role in this mandated reporting. Like,
They ought to know. That's
I would
part
hope
of the
so.
part of the expectation is that if someone is a mandated reporter, that they know
Have to
they're a
stop.
mandated reporter
Yeah.
and they're supposed to receive a certain amount of training
Right.
around what that means for them to be a mandated reporter.
Okay. So, hmm. Under what circumstances does a mandated reporter report? Because maybe in some instances, maybe it's like, okay, do I do it? Do I not do it? What is the
There's a
circumstance?
lot of that happens. Do I do it? Do I not do it? Basically, mandated reporters' responsibilities kick in when they have a reasonable suspicion that abuse has occurred. So again, there's this idea of reasonableness, which is a real kind of legal term. Do I have enough information that I
Okay.
think it's reasonable um, that this person might have experienced abuse? That doesn't mean they have to investigate it. Their role isn't to investigate it and figure out for sure that it happened. In order for them to make a report, it's do they have a reasonable suspicion that something has occurred? And that can be because they um, observed something about the
Right.
child that causes them to have that reasonable suspicion, or that the child disclosed something themselves that causes them to have that reasonable suspicion. So, for example, I was doing when I used to talk to kids directly and doing a presentation in class, similar to what you're probably talking about, Angie, I had a child tell me that her mom hit her in the face and her nose started bleeding. So that was reasonable suspicion. It wasn't my
Right.
job to check out was this particular child telling me the truth or not telling me the truth. It wasn't my job to go into any of it to figure out the rest of it, but taking it on the face of that, that's a
Absolutely.
reasonable suspicion there.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And this is just to help give maybe our viewers or audience just a, more clarity of it as well. Um, so I do just have this question. So our job is to primarily promote, safety in the schools, tracking the safety of students when it comes to physical abuse and sexual assault. Of course, that is our job for preventionists. However, how important is it for these parents to start having these conversations with the children?
Well, I mean, as a preventionist, I think there's something that, everyone can be doing when they're talking to their child about prevention, depending on what it is that you're talking about. So I guess the first thing that I would want to make very clear is that it's not a child's responsibility to keep abuse from happening to them because they're children. They're not adults. It's not a 5-year-old's responsibility to keep an adult from hurting them. It is the adult's responsibility to not hurt the child. So when we're talking to our kids about abuse, we're really talking primarily for them to understand what their rights are as children. So, that child assault prevention project, we talked about how all kids had the right to be strong, safe, and free. Well, what does that mean? what does that really look like? What rights to privacy do children have? What rights do they have around their own body,
Right.
and who can touch it and who can't touch it, and the things that they can do when they don't feel safe. But it's not reasonable for me to expect a young child, and not even just a young child, I mean even teenagers, to, it's not reasonable to say that that child is responsible for stopping an adult from hurting them.
And that's just really important. And of course, that makes a lot of sense. But it's just important to state that because some aspects or some teaching points could be more so like make sure this doesn't happen, more so talking to the child. So that makes a lot of sense. It's so interesting too because I think I love when I hear professionals and staff or even parents talk about teaching their children the boundaries of their own boundary, I'm sorry, of their own bodies.
Oh yeah.
Meaning, hey, if you don't, and it's so funny because I heard a story about this in training. It's like if you don't want to go kiss Grandma Shirley over there, you don't have to. But Grandma is upset. Grandma
That's
does
right.
not
Yeah.
like that.
That's a big one. That's a big discussion about
I
family
know. It
expectations and
was, and
children's
I
affection.
exactly. And I only brought that up because when I was in the training, there was a situation where, this lady said, I teach my children if they don't want to, this is the right you have, you don't have to. So grandma's like, you're teaching them wrong. And you tell him to come give grandma a kiss. And he's like, no, I don't want to kiss you because grandma leaves all big slobbery kisses on my face and I don't like it. So it's just very interesting when teaching kids about their boundaries and things
Well,
like
yeah,
that.
and what some people sometimes don't understand is it isn't about grandma. It's about another person who might want to transgress that child's boundaries. And what is the child learning? Because little
Right. I
kids
have
aren't,
to do something I
they're
don't
not,
want to.
yeah, they're not differentiating this adult from this adult from this adult. What the message is, you don't have the right to say no to an adult. And that's a dangerous message for children of any age to have, because they do have the right to say no to an adult. And adults also need to know that children have the right to say
Say
no
no.
to harmful things and to have boundaries. So this also kicks up a lot of things with parents around, I don't want my kid saying no all the time. Well, your kid's going to say no to you all the time anyway. There
Yeah.
are so many
Yeah.
things I learned about what I've been teaching once I had my own
Right. I
child,
was gonna say
that
my
no
child
one
is
had to
2 and
tell
he's saying
him that it
no.
was okay to say no for him to just start
Right.
saying no all the time anyway. There's no amount of
Exactly.
teaching that I think is that he's going to get that's going to cause him to say no any more than he already does, because
I agree.
children's job to a certain extent is to push boundaries. It's to figure out where they can go, and our job is adults is to reassert those boundaries for them and provide them that structure by pushing back against it,
Absolutely.
when it's appropriate, and letting them know when it is. So a couple of examples of that kind of thing are, so when your child is old enough, or when you can figure out that they're old enough, is giving them more of their individual control over the cleanliness of their body. So when they're taking baths, at a certain extent, you have to do everything with it. But as soon as my son was old enough to really grasp a washcloth, he became responsible for washing his private parts because he was old enough to do that. And I could say, these are your private parts. These are the only people that are allowed to touch them. And
Yeah.
you're going to start taking some responsibility for your body. And this, it wasn't that I couldn't do it or that I was going to do anything
Right.
wrong to him about it, but it was just about him being able to learn that this is mine and it's important and I have power over it.
Yes, I was just about to say that. Yes. And I just love that. I love the conversation and being able to have that appropriate language, with them for them to understand that.
Right.
Because
Even
I
to this,
mean, yeah, I was just gonna say, because maybe sometimes children aren't taught this. Sometimes it's like, I want my kid to know this, but I don't want to talk to them about it. So
Yeah.
it's just
Well,
like,
and you have to talk to him about it because they're not going to know. So even to this day, he's getting older. And it would always be if I needed to watch, I would ask for permission. Okay, can I watch this part of you? Because sometimes they're not going to do it right. Okay, yeah, I'm realistic.
exactly.
They're small people and they're not always
Yeah.
going to get it right.
Yeah.
But then practicing that permission, can I do this? This is what's going on. I want to do this for you. And as kids get older, there can be things medically wrong, where you need to, put medicine on, or
Right.
and so you're setting up early, this idea of, I'm going to respect your privacy and I'm going to ask permission and we're going to talk about it, because they know that they have that right, so that when someone else starts to violate that right, they recognize it right away,
They
because
know they
that's
have the power to say yes or no.
they might not have the power to stop it, and it's not realistic for
Exactly.
me to expect that they would, but they're going to have the power to know what's
Yep.
going on, and more likely do that help seeking that we are wanting them to do as soon as possible,
Yes.
instead of being in a place where they're like, wait a minute, is this okay or is this not okay? And can I talk to my parent about something that involves my private parts or not? So that's the other piece that's important, is that teaching your children that there's no shame and talking about every single part of their body and what it does and what it's supposed to do and what it's there for. Because if you want them to come and tell you everything, you have to always be talking to them about everything. Even right now, when my
Exactly.
kid is just like, oh my God, he was grown up knowing that his butt is a butt and his penis is a penis. But if I say penis now, he's like,
Oh, what? Okay.
That's
All
what
right.
it's called. That is not what we said.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh.
But it's out there.
Right.
And we know that we can talk about it. And if he ever has to come and talk to me about it,
Knows that he can.
he
Hmm.
can't, because there's no shame that's
So
around.
everything that you're explaining right now, this ability to be able to communicate, would this be considered an example of a protective factor?
Yes, this would be
Okay.
considered an example of a protective factor. And it's
Okay.
it's also one of the things that we put that expectation on kids, sometimes without necessarily telling them that.
Right.
Or we might say that, but then when we don't talk about it at all, the unspoken message that they get is that they can't really talk about
Exactly.
that kind of thing. And it's so important as they start to get older and get into relationships. So this kind of reminds me back to when Celeste and I were doing tea, and we were talking about that book that came up where that woman was interviewing boys about their experiences with sex and sexual assault and masculinity and all of that kind of stuff. And I just keep remembering a part of what she said is that no one ever talked to these boys about, any intimacy, in relationships, and what that was about and what the expectations were on them. So you're slowly setting up in age appropriate ways your ability to continue to have that conversation. And so right now I'm in that part where it's going to start to get weird.
Right. Because he's gonna be like, okay, no. Right. Or they're getting to that stage where it's like, let's talk about sexual abuse. Oh my
And we
goodness.
had some conversation not too long ago where I was like, yep, it's uncomfortable and we're just going to have to
We're
deal with
gonna
it,
do it.
buddy, because it's going to be uncomfortable. But if no one talks to you about it, you're never going to know about it. And I can't remember what it was. I don't know why we were talking about how he would stand up to friends or talk what he would say back to friends. And I said, well, what are you going to do if someone shows you a movie with naked people in it? It's like, what?
I know he's
No
like,
one's gonna
Mom.
do that. Well, what are you gonna, well, I'm just gonna tell them no, that I don't want to watch it. And I said, okay, but what if they make fun of you and they start teasing you because you don't want to watch it? Well, I don't know. I might get mad about the teasing. He's like, my friends would never do that. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to tell you this right now. Someone will. It will happen. And if we don't start talking about what your plan is going to be when it does happen, I'm not so worried about him being like, whoa, I don't want to see that. I'm definitely worried about him being like, I don't want to disappoint my friends by not
Yeah.
being part of this.
With the fear of being talked about because of that. Yeah. Yeah. But I
And that,
just love it. I just love hearing you talk just because that's important. That's really important to have just not even connection, that openness with your child to be able to have these conversations because of the fact of the matter is they're going to get older and they're going to experience stuff whether you like it or not, whether you can control it or not. So at least you know I taught them this, or we at least we talked about this, to where their mind, once this happens, their mind will wonder, okay, we talked about this. What did I say I was going to do? At least they know that they know, like you said, right from wrong, to know when something doesn't feel right and I can make a good decision for myself.
yeah, I think at the end of the day, we all want to believe that our kids can come to us when they need to. So you're setting up those little examples along the way
Yes.
about how they can do that, and then going back to kind of that protective factor piece, a huge protective factor across family, school, and community, and we've talked about this a lot, is having that one adult, having at least one adult in the child's life that they know cares about them, that supports them, that they can go to with anything. That is like the big, big, big one.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
up there. And when the more of those that kids have, even better. But being that, so all of these kinds of things are how you be that kind of adult. It's not like, this conversation is more important than this one. It's this
Exactly.
idea
It's
of,
continuous.
yeah, you're building up these different ways that you're showing that I support you no matter what, which is what a lot of parents say that to your kids. I support you no matter what. Well, then show your children, and sometimes you can set it up so that you're showing them that kind of thing. So for us, one of the things that we do is when we tickle, every time he says stop, we stop. Even if we think
Oh,
even when we think it's
yeah.
not a real stop, even though when we think it's like you're laughing and laughing and you're just like, stop, stop, we
Yeah,
stop no
yeah. We
matter what.
stop.
We just stop and then say, okay, do you really want me to stop or do you want me to keep going?
I like that. And it's also teaching that consent aspect too.
Yes, that's
Yes.
hugely around teaching consent. So for me, full disclosure, I am raising a son
Two.
as a woman who started out doing sexual assault work that was all about constantly hearing about girls and young women being sexually assaulted. So, I mean, for me, I feel like I have this enormous responsibility to raise a son into a man that doesn't sexually assault.
For violence. Yeah.
That's violence prevention
Yes.
right there.
Yes. I really love how you put things into perspective. So if we were to have someone watching right now, or just anyone that would like to, pass on the knowledge, what are some signs for adults or professionals to look for in children when we're talking about child abuse or neglect or things like that?
Yeah, so I mean, there's some of the physical signs can be a little bit more obvious, but I think that you're not necessarily going to see those as much. So I mean, obviously, when you see a child that has any kind of injury, kind of checking out, what that injury is about, and whether or not what the child says back to you makes sense. People can say all kinds
Right.
of, but does this seem to make sense? Am I seeing these injuries all the time? Do they seem to be frequent? Do they seem to be more so than a child of that age might get? So like, toddlers have scraped up knees all the time. That's part of being a toddler. So is it different, than what seems to be age appropriate, for what a child would be doing? But a lot of it can be behavioral types of things, which can be a little bit difficult to tease out when you don't know a child, because children they are different, just like we all are different. So a loud and boisterous child doesn't always mean one thing. A really quiet and timid child doesn't always mean something else. But it's
It could be
being
changing
observant.
behavior,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Okay.
changes in behavior. So once you get to know a child, you start to get to know what's typical for them. So
Right.
then when something starts to happen that's out of the ordinary, for that particular child, that you're able to kind of check out what's going on with that. I
Right.
also think it's important to really look at children that have a pattern of bullying behavior and figuring out what's going on with that
Kind of
child.
like the whole trauma informed aspect, if
Yeah.
you see a change in their behavior, talk to them, try to see what's going on, things like that.
Right, when there's changes in grades, changes in
Right.
performance, in their ability to focus, like anything that starts to look really different, being able to check that out. But I always like to bring up the bully because we're definitely going to check out the kid who's being bullied and kind of check into that, but often we're not. The trauma informed piece is also going back to the person who's doing the bullying behavior and trying to figure out what's going on with that, because that's not, most kids don't do that. So what's going on with this particular kid that they're doing that? What's going on that their behavior is hurtful to others, and what could be behind that? Because you're looking again at trying to support the kids in the best way as possible. So when we talk about prevention, we're not just talking about preventing kids from being hurt. We're also
Exactly.
talking about preventing kids from doing
With the
harm and
harm.
figuring out
Right.
what's going on behind that, because
Right.
that's not healthy either, and you want
Right.
all the kids to be healthy and support factors in their life that can help them be
Yeah,
healthy. I
it's like
don't
a full, it's a full circle that you have to help. Even with us, yes, we work with our victims or survivors, but we also work with perpetrators as well. You have to work with both sides.
Right, I mean, sometimes people are acting out in ways that we don't understand because they aren't getting their needs met in other areas of their lives. And so that's a big piece of prevention, and that's a big piece of what a protective factor is. When people have their needs met, they are more likely to have a healthy life, right? When they have their needs met. And when people don't have
Absolutely.
their needs met, they're going to do things
Right.
to get their
To
needs
try
met
to get
in
their
one
needs
way,
met.
shape, or form.
Exactly. Exactly. I love that. And I just love the way you put everything into perspective. And I just really, really appreciate you. I just think this was a good episode. Look, I'm over here like this was a good episode. I don't know what other people think. I
We
think
always think it's a good episode.
this is awesome. So is there any, before we get into questions or anything, is there anything else that you would like to share or, speak about or speak on?
Oh, I think we can go to questions and then we'll
Okay.
move.
Well, look, we're gonna be like, and then this happened. So Celeste, do we have any questions or any comments?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, cool. So we have one question. So it says this: It's valuable to recognize the power differential between children and adults in the context of child abuse and neglect. And that can often be easy to see with younger children. So can you discuss how that kind of power differential is relevant with teens as well? So I think they're
Yeah.
kind of asking, it's really easy to recognize that power differential when you're talking about little ones, but let's talk a little
Yeah.
bit about the teens.
Yeah, and it's a really important point, and it's a great question to bring up because we tend to, for whatever reason, decide that once a child reaches teenage years, we're going to treat them like an adult. And they're not adults. So we know that the brain doesn't stop developing until about the mid-20s. So surprise for all of you who are out there.
Yeah,
Your brain is still
made it, no?
developing and growing into your mid-20s. You're not done yet. So yeah, teenagers are children. And we default to treating them like adults, which is not appropriate, which is why you're seeing a lot more of an emphasis on changing the way that the juvenile justice system works and how kids are treated when crimes are involved and all of that sort of thing. So that is something that it is on the onus of adults to recognize that teenagers are not adults. It's not reasonable to expect them to be able to make decisions in the rational way that we would expect adults to make decisions, because quite literally they are unable to. They're still developing and they're still growing, and that's still something that their brains haven't gotten to yet and their maturity hasn't gotten to yet. You can talk to them differently than you would talk to, you know, a younger child or an elementary school age child, but they are still children, and adults still have a lot of power and authority over them, which again is why it's so important to try to establish your norms and precedents with how you are with each other early on and going forward, because they're going to carry those lessons into their adolescence. You know, they absolutely are going to do that, and it is in many cases going to be harder to create boundaries and create structure. But if you've never done it before and you just start trying to do it once they turn into a teenager, that's when you get some of these huge fights, because it's not something that they've ever had before as they're moving up. So the sooner that that can be put in place for children, the better they are, you know, kind of going forward, because they're expecting it and they understand it and they know it. So anytime you're changing your pattern with someone, it's very difficult in doing that, because that's not the thing that they've always known.
I'm up here like I'm applying to my own life. Like, Jenny, talk to her. No, just kidding. No, but I love it. Thank
It's
you.
always hard to do this work when you also have
I
kids, because you're
know.
always like, am I doing that though?
Right. Look, I'm sitting here like, me? No? Okay. Oh gosh. Celeste, is there any other questions?
No questions so far. That was a really good explanation though, Jenny.
It was. It was. It was. I was sitting here like,
Yeah, I mean, really,
oh.
the easy answer is teenagers they're still children.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Jenny. We really appreciate you so much, your continued support, your knowledge, just your expertise, just everything. We really appreciate you. And we also just want to say thank you to everyone that are tuning in, who continues to tune in. And remember, next week is the same time, same place, and different tea.
And
Have
your
a great
50th episode. So it's
it is the
congratulations.
50th. And
So
our
next
boss
week.
did tell us this. Yeah, she wrote us in the chat and told us. So yes, next week will be our 50th episode. Oh my goodness. So yes, please tune in next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie. Bye, everyone.
Bye.